All right, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. My apologies for the delayed start. Kansas Board of Regents meeting for March 11th, 2026. First agenda item would include approval of the minutes from February 11th and then a February 13th special meeting and February 25th special meeting. Would entertain any discussion related to the minutes, if not a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Regent Amar, second by Regent Crocker. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, minutes are approved. In terms of introductions, I've got a couple myself. First of all, big welcome to Regent Peter Johnston, who was confirmed by the Kansas Senate actually during our February meeting and hit the ground running the following day. But Regent Johnston, very, very happy to have you on board and appreciate your service, and obviously appreciate the governor's office and the Kansas Senate for getting us back to full strength. So glad to have you with us. Yeah. And also, I believe 7-8 days on the job, brand new president in Emporia State, Dr. Matt Baker. Look forward to your leadership. Makes it even sweeter that we were able to steal you from Northwest Missouri. Anytime we can stick it to them and get a great leader at the same time, that's a double win for us. So very glad to have you on board. Look forward to working with you over the next year. So big round of applause for President Baker, please. Any other introductions from the CEOs? Chancellor Girard.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Benson. And by the way, President Baker is a Topeka native, so it's great to have him home as well. So good to have you back.
And I believe it.
And a K-State, I was going to admit that part.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to do it, but you.
Thrilled to have you back, though. Well, welcome aboard. It's my pleasure to introduce to you our new Provost, Executive Vice Chancellor of the Lawrence Campus, and Chief Academic Officer for the University of Kansas, Arash Mafi, who is here with us today. Arash, thank you for being here.
Welcome.
Arash is stepping into this role having served as the Executive Dean of our College of Liberal Arts and Sciences for the last 3.5 years and has done an outstanding job there. Under his leadership, we've reduced our DFW rates by 19% in the college and has really done an incredible job working with the faculty to restructure curriculum there. We stole Arash from the University of New Mexico, where he was the interim dean of the college there, but was a professor as well and led the Center for High Technology Materials. He's a physicist by training and does things that I don't understand. But was extremely successful there. And before that, was at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, did his PhD at Ohio State University and his postdoc at Arizona. But has already demonstrated phenomenal leadership for us at the University of Kansas. And we're thrilled to have him move from the executive dean role. And just for context, the executive dean role at KU accounts for 45% of our student body. It's a huge college, and he's done an outstanding job, and we're thrilled to have him joining us as provost. That creates a vacuum, obviously, as he steps out of the dean role there. And I'm happy to announce that Jennifer Roberts, who I think most of you know for having worked as our senior vice provost for academic affairs at KU, is also a member of the college, is a professor of geology, has been a chair in that college, and has stepped in now as the dean, not the interim dean, but the dean for the executive dean for the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. So able to maintain two terrific talents here. And then backfilling really Jen's role in the provost's office is Dr. Rick Steele, who has served as our vice provost for graduate and postdoctoral affairs for the last 2 years. He's in the Department of Applied Behavioral Sciences, been with KU for 25 years, demonstrated incredible leadership role in clinical child psychology in our doctoral program, our training program, as well as the clinics. Has also been the interim chair of economics. I haven't had a chance to ask him how that happened, but not a typical one. But he's also very involved, including a member of our Cancer Control and Population Health Program at the KU Cancer Center. So really excited to have Rick step into that role in an interim capacity while Provost Mafi has a chance to survey the landscape and decide what next steps are for academic affairs. So really thrilled to have 3 great KU leaders step up into new roles and continue to advance their careers.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chancellor, and welcome aboard. Any other introductions? All right, moving into the chair report, day I've looked forward to for a while. We get to hear Pillar 3 reports from the research universities, and we'll also be joined by Lieutenant Governor and Secretary of Commerce David Tolan, who is a true partner to higher education and has had an incredible impact on the state, and really appreciate him inviting higher education to the table at many economic development projects. So appreciate the Lieutenant Governor joining us, and appreciate President Flanders' efforts in getting him here. This evening, the Regents and the CEOs will host a reception with community and technical college presidents, trustees, and board members. We're excited to have the opportunity to spend some time with our counterparts from the coordinated institutions in our system, and we are eager to hear their perspective on the higher education landscape and discuss how we can continue working together to build the best possible system for Kansas families, students, and businesses. So that will conclude my chair report, but would be happy to answer any questions. All right, moving on. And I should have mentioned that Vice Chair Mendoza is obviously unable to join us here today. So next up, President and CEO report, President Flanders.
Right. Thank you, Chair Benson. Obviously, we've been involved with a very busy legislative session, a busy time of year for everyone here in Topeka. I did have an opportunity to travel and visit one of our community colleges, Barton Community College, and presented to their Leadership Institute, which are individuals that are going through that institute that are employed by the college, and had an opportunity also to talk with their president and board members. And it just really was a great experience to go out and be on their campus and see all the innovative things that Barton is doing to serve students, not only in Great Bend, but also at the post at Fort Riley. And then also had an opportunity to join Commissioner Randy Watson for their podcast, and we talked about college and career readiness, and really looked at how we've expanded dual and concurrent enrollment, which was positive, and then talked about some of the headwinds in terms of student preparation coming into post-secondary, and the upcoming enrollment cliff, and also how do we get more students to continue to fill out the FAFSA paperwork and apply to college and really get that opportunity. So just a very positive experience there. That concludes my report.
Okay. Any questions for President Flanders? All right, hearing none, we'll move into our report from the Council of Faculty Senate Presidents. President Rochelle Rowley, representing Emporia State University. Welcome, President Rowley.
Hello. Thank you for allowing me to give this update. It's a short one. We reviewed the International Baccalaureate Program cut scores, and I am happy to report that there are no suggested changes. And additionally, we reviewed the credit for prior learning guidelines, and we do not have any suggested changes for that either. I'm looking forward to your visit to Emporia State University next month.
As are we. Any questions for President Rowley? Thank you again for your service. Next up, our Student Advisory Committee report presented by President Aswad Zaran, also from Emporia State. Welcome, President Zaran.
Thank you, Chairman Benson. Thank you, Regents. I first wanted to extend a warm welcome to Regent Peter Johnston. I'm very excited to meet you. In our Student Advisory Council meeting today, we spoke about student elections as some of our institutions have already completed and others are in the process of election season completion. So you may be seeing some new student faces around as some of our current SAC leaders gear up for retirement. I have had some exciting interactions with community and technical college faculty and administrators, and with the consensus from SAC, we plan to reach out to them to understand some of our commonalities so that we can do some of the footwork to understand what are some of the system-wide student needs for our successors coming after us. Finally, just to reiterate, very ecstatic and looking forward to having all of you at ESU's campus in April. That concludes my report.
All right. Any questions for President Zaran? All right. Thank you again. Moving into our standing committee reports, we'll start off with academic affairs. Regent Alicia Johnston. Now we have two Blakes and two Regent Johnstons, just trying to see how much we can confuse people. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair Benson. I'm just reporting on one meeting today as we did not have our virtual meeting in February. Wichita State University Provost Monica Lonsberry and Vice Provost of Academic Affairs Ashley Jack presented on the Wichita State AY 2025 Program Review Report. Wichita State evaluated all 129 academic programs against the board-approved metrics and addressed the minimum thresholds that programs did not meet. Recommendations will be presented to the full board for review in May. Vice Provost Jack also provided an update on the 5 programs identified for action in the AY 2024 program review. As a reminder, universities will provide updates to BASC on all programs identified for action from the AY 2024 program review in spring of next year. Kansas State University Provost Jesse Mendez presented a 1-year follow-up report on K-State's AY 2025 program review, in which 3 programs had been identified for action. They also provided an update on the 2 programs identified for action in the AY 2024 program review. Recommendations will be presented to the full board for review in May or June. That concludes my report, and I would be happy to answer questions.
Right. Thank you, Regent Johnston. Any questions for Regent Johnston and Fiscal Affairs? Okay. Thank you. Moving on now to Fiscal Affairs and Audit, Regent Dicus.
Thank you, Chair Benson. We met this morning and also had a meeting on our agenda call on the first Tuesday of March, or earlier on the 3rd. This morning we had reports from each of the universities, so we had a very long meeting, but not a lot on the agenda items. We had internal audit plans from each of the KU Med Center, Wichita State University, and Emporia State on what their updated internal audit plans for the fiscal year and looking ahead also to this calendar year. Yeah, we had 3 additional financial reports, including the composite financial index and the budget plans for this year from K-State, Wichita State, and KU. K-State took a little extra time, so we were late to lunch on that based on the explanation of the others who were given 10 minutes in time and somebody took 40 minutes in time. But we won't name names in that regard. We also heard from Jim McMurray with KDFA regarding the system debt capacity on plans and assessment, and also 3 universities have plans for debt here just in the next 45 days. After that, based on the time, we went through the rest of the agenda very quickly, and that would include my report at this time.
All right. Any questions for Regent Dicus and Fiscal Affairs and Audit? All right. Thank you again. We'll now move into consideration of the consent agenda. Are there any items on the consent agenda that fellow regents would like to pull down and discuss? If not, would entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Okay. Motion by Regent Johnston.
Sorry, second.
Second by Regent Crocker. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Consent calendar is approved. All right. Moving into the discussion agenda, I believe that the Lieutenant Governor is scheduled to be here at 2 o'clock. So in advance of that, we will ask for a legislative update from none other than Fred Patton. Welcome, Fred.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Good to see you all. We are already in week 9, middle of week 9 of the legislative session. So we're quickly approaching first adjournment, which is on March 27th. Next Tuesday is the final day for committees to meet, except there are ways around that. But most committees will stop meeting next Tuesday, and then they'll have 3 days on the floor where they're debating all the bills that they've gotten out so far. Committees are really busy this week, debating bill or hearing and working bills that have come from the other chamber. Some have finished their work, but most have full schedules this week. They're all working on, most of them are working on Friday and then Monday and Tuesday to try to get stuff out. You all had several non-budgetary legislative priorities for the session. All of those dealt with pretty much minor tweaks to the scholarships that K-Board administers for the legislature. Two of those priorities are moving through the process, having passed the full House, having hearings in Senate Ed tomorrow afternoon. I would expect they'll come out. They may be bundled together, but I think they'll get out and probably be before the full floor next week and then move on to the governor. One of the most important things left for the system is your budget. Not much has changed since the update last month. The committees had finished their work at that point in time. Both chambers have passed the budget bills, did not make any changes. And conference committee has started. It started at 1 o'clock today. I've been sitting over there in the corner watching along. At this point, they're just comparing the differences. They put a sheet together that shows the differences in each chamber in the bill. And they talk through those. We'll see. I suspect they'll start working evenings, early mornings. Any breaks they can find, they'll work. So we'll keep an eye on that. There are a number of things we're still working on your behalf in the budget. Good news is there's pieces in the budget of both budgets that we like. So we'll hopefully get the best of both worlds. Sometimes that's the case. Often they settle somewhere in the middle. As you all know, their priority this year is to reduce that budget as much as they can. So they may settle towards the lesser of the budgets in each house. We'll see how that works, but certainly push for all we can get. End of session is in sight. There's still a number of bills we're keeping an eye on that either directly or indirectly impact higher ed. Blueprint for Literacy has a bill. Been trying to get a hearing for that for quite some time. That's now scheduled for Friday. There's the bill that was requested this morning by the majority leader that we'll keep an eye on and see where that goes. Other than that, just again, a number of things out there, but nothing all that high priority at this point. Any questions?
Yes, Regent Wolfmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So they started negotiating this afternoon. Are they going to do the work through the rest of the afternoon or evening, or are they just going?
I think so far they've got that comparison sheet, that you get where you check the boxes, who's the winner and loser in each chamber. They're just going over that. So they've not even made it through that as when I walked over here. I would guess they do that. The Senate, what they're in here in a little bit. So I'm guessing they're going to try to be done with that part by then. And then I don't know beyond that, but I'll keep listening and let you know when they say they're coming back.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yep.
Other questions for Fred? Thanks so much, Fred.
Thank you.
So while we await the lieutenant governor, and I don't want to necessarily start the Pillar 3 reports and then have you stop in the middle of them. And I know General Counsel Yuri just needed to step out. So President Muma, if you don't mind, we will ask you if you're prepared to go ahead and maybe discuss the request to name an academic unit. And feel free to drag it out because we've still got about 10 minutes. Yeah. Talk slowly.
Well,
Yeah.
Ethan is pretty good at that.
I'm usually a man of few words, so I'll try. All right, we're requesting approval to name, can you hand me my glasses? I'm sorry, I should. To name the Department of Aerospace Engineering, the Lynn and Sherry Nichols Department of Aerospace Engineering. This proposed naming recognized Lynn and Sherry Nichols' longstanding partnership with the university and the significant contributions to the College of Engineering and the broader aerospace industry in Kansas. For those of you who don't know, Lynn and Sherry Nichols previously owned Yingling Aviation and led its revival from a virtually dormant business in Wichita to impressive levels of success, which now holds a well-deserved reputation as one of the nation's leading fixed-based operations, maintenance, repair, and overhaul facilities and parts suppliers. The company is headquartered in Wichita and was the first dealer of Cessna aircraft and celebrates its 80th anniversary this year. Lynn has advanced not only the industry, but Wichita community through notable success, which was recognized by the Wichita Aero Club's trophy back in 2018. In addition to their community service and industry expertise, Lynn and Sherry have remained ardent supporters of WSU, including athletics. Lynn has chaired or served on several search committees for university leaders and previously served as chair of the foundation's board and currently serves as the past chair. So in recognition of their support of Wichita State, we seek to get approval from you all to name the Department of Aerospace Engineering the Lynn and Sherry Nichols Department of Aerospace Engineering. And this designation reflects the university's deep respect for the Nichols leadership in the aerospace industry and their enduring investment in the education and professional development of WSU students. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, President Muma. Any request related to, or any questions related to the request? Hearing none, would entertain a motion to approve. Okay, I have a
I'll
motion by
second.
Regent Johnston, second by Regent Prasker, Amar? Amar, okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you, President Muma. So I think we won't break necessarily, but we'll just kind of hang out for a few minutes and await the Lieutenant Governor, because that's pretty well everything else on our agenda this afternoon. So we'll just talk amongst yourselves for 4 or 5 minutes. Yeah. Thanks, Kelly. Kelly's even coaching me on hand signals here. Yeah. Talk amongst. Yeah.
Yeah, he's gonna send them for Friday and Saturday. There is no. Yeah, Thursdays are taken, but Friday and Saturdays. Yeah.
The meeting. It is my pleasure this afternoon to introduce a special guest, someone who is no stranger to anybody in the room. He's not only an incredible professional, but he's extremely humble. So he would not tell you that the state has attracted more than $23 billion, that's billion with a B, in investment since he became the Secretary of Commerce in 2019, including recruitment of the largest economic development project in the state's history. Just as importantly, he is a true friend of higher education. We appreciate him having higher education at the table. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome the Lieutenant Governor and Commerce Secretary, David Tolan. We were supposed to have some walk-up music or something like that.
Well, that was a great introduction, Chairman. And I should add that I'm not so humble that I won't correct the record and say that it's actually 31.4 billion in private sector investments. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today. I have a lot of slides, a lot of content I'd like to cover today, and so I'm going to skip all the usual warm up and jump right in if I may. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. Appreciate President Flanders and the invitation, and sorry I had to reschedule, but I think we're going to have a conversation here that's an important one today. And I would like to go back to a question that I got when I was last here 2 years ago from Regent Winter. And he was basically trying to drill down to what is the top thing we hear from businesses that's a critique of the higher education system in our state. And when I was asked that question here at the dais, I didn't answer it that day, and I said I would get back to him. And I'm going to get back to everybody today on that here in a few minutes. But let me set the stage first. So $31.4 billion, 84,000 new and retained jobs. We've broken every record in state history for private sector capital investment, for tourism, you name it, across the board. It's been a good run. To put this in perspective, so the Kelly Toland administration is to the right of the dotted line. And I like to show this with the idea being that we've created a new normal in our state by improving collaboration between Department of Commerce and higher ed and a lot of other things that have occurred to ensure that our incentives are strong, that we're making our young people aware that these new opportunities exist for them in Kansas, working to recruit young people back, and swinging harder perhaps than what we had done in the past. So, you know, we're now at a point where if the state were to go below $3 billion in private sector investment in a year, I would be very concerned. And I was elated in 2019, our first year in office, to have been able to lead a department that brought 1.3. So we really have bent the curve in a positive direction. We hope a permanent one. Jobs. So jobs are traditionally the focus of economic developers. We've tended to focus more on attracting large-scale investment because we do have a talent shortage in the state. And so the results of this are borne out, as you see, from 2020. We've had a pretty steady reduction. And then in 2024, that was kind of a fluke year where some projects landed at the end of 2023 and some others didn't get done until 2025. But the point would be we have focused less on trying to land the big job projects and more on the large-scale investments. There are about 330 active economic development leads that the Kansas Department of Commerce is pursuing right now. To put that in context, back in 2019, when I took over at Commerce, we had about 120. So we have dramatically more leads, and you can see what the breakdown is across sectors there. We are very much focused around the idea that the way to grow a state is to focus on quality of life. And of course, education is at the core of quality of life. But there are all sorts of different strategies that we use as an agency to ensure that we have high quality communities that are places that people want to live in. We know that talent can go anywhere, and it does go anywhere. And it's critically important as we talk about out-migration of our educated talent here in a few slides, that we keep in mind that we've got to understand what they're going for. And some of it is about economic opportunities that don't currently exist in Kansas. And other parts of it are about things that maybe we can't change. So Iola High School grad, 2 degrees from KU. As soon as I was done with my graduate program, my wife and I went to the East Coast. And you couldn't have stopped us when we were 23. Because we wanted to have a different type of lifestyle at that time in our lives. But we have a child, we're living in a row house in the middle of DC. That wasn't how an Iola kid and a Pittsburgh, Kansas kid wanted to raise their children. And so we wanted to come back to Kansas, and we had that opportunity. But there are real economic reasons why our educated talent leaves the state. And that's been one of the focus areas of our department, making sure that we're going after the types of jobs that can be immediate opportunities for our higher ed grads to land in. We have had a great relationship between the Commerce Department and the Board of Regents in my time in office. And I'm very grateful to President Flanders, who has always been available at a moment's notice to answer a question, get on a plane. I remember some of the Panasonic craziness, 24 hours, Blake needs you on the plane in the morning, that kind of situation. And that has been essential to the kind of success that we've had. Our shared priorities between KBOR and Commerce, in my mind, really center around three areas. So, of course, talent, the obvious one, but tech transfer, being able to take the research that's being done at our state's universities, turning it into wealth, turning it into new companies, new opportunities for folks, and then transformation in all the forms that takes. So it's about our community college and technical colleges that are working to provide the training for these companies that are growing and evolving and seeking out new markets and trying to commercialize their own new products. And there's all sorts of factors that we share. There's these common threads that hold us together. So I'm going to give our department grades in these three areas, and I'm going to give KBOR institutions grades right now. So traditional economic development. This is the core of what we do. So this is landing the companies. This is the basic blocking and tackling. It's going out and recruiting, making the case, selling Kansas as a place to do business. We're top 5 in the country. I give us an A on that. Working as a partner to bend the talent pipeline so that it's directed away from Nashville and Dallas and Denver and some of these other markets, we haven't done a very good job from the commerce end as far as I'm concerned. And I'll talk about why that is in a second. So I give us a C. And my greatest disappointment as secretary is that I don't feel like I've done enough to really drive home the importance of commercializing the R&D that is coming out of our universities. And I give us a D. I give me a D on that as the secretary. So, KBOR, and I'm talking actually about, certainly about the folks here on the 5th floor, but also about our university partners and our community college partners. So at the executive level, when I call any of these people, any of the presidents of the community or technical colleges, I guarantee I get a great response. They're on it. There's no delay. They move at the speed of business. It's great. So that's an A. Below the executive offices, it's not as good. And I'll give you an example of what we're talking about there. Research and training specialties. What I'm talking about here is that we need, as a commerce department that's selling Kansas and the assets that exist in Kansas, to know all sorts of facts about where our strengths lie. So we can talk about our central position, we can talk about railroad access and highways and real estate and incentives and all those factors that are important for businesses. Where I lack depth and where our team at Commerce lacks depth is in knowing that a particular higher ed institution in the state is good at tiddlywinks manufacturing, for example, at training that talent. So I can tell you at a high level for each of these institutions, one thing that is their specialty that they're particularly good at. But there's a lot more that I don't know about each of your institutions up here and throughout the folks that are in this room that we need to know as your economic development partners. And so we need more depth there. And then front door development. The idea here is around there needs to be a central place for businesses or entrepreneurs, innovators, folks that need help developing a prototype, folks that need some research done in a particular area so that they can go forward with their business plan or their concept, their new company. It needs to be easy and seamless at every institution. We've put some dollars into that I'll talk about in a second. We aren't as far along as I'd like to be, but I think we're at about a B right now. So here's something that hasn't gone as well. And this is a survey that's related to my point about there's executive level responsiveness, which is an A, and then there is the responsiveness of the folks that are farther down in the institutions. So one of my staff members, Romaine Redmond, who leads our Office of Innovation, sent out a survey that included these 5 questions. And it was pretty straightforward. We gave 9 days. 9, is that business days or calendar days? We gave 9 calendar days on that. And if you look at these questions, in my mind, if we're going to be neatly aligned as economic development partners, we need our folks on the higher ed side to be able to quickly rattle these things off. Our top 5 research competencies are X, Y, and Z. And what occurred here is we had one institution that responded. They were a day late beyond the original deadline. We extended the deadline. We've now received responses from all the institutions except one. But this is important because of speed. So Project Turtle, this is a national request for proposals Department of Commerce got, I don't know if this was last year or the year before. So we had 11 days to respond to all sorts of highly technical questions about workforce, about our capabilities in the state and beyond. And the particulars don't matter. The point is, here's 4 slides worth, and there's 5 more that we could have put up there. That site consultant, that company needed an answer in 11 days, 11 calendar days on it, and we do not have all the answers at the Department of Commerce. We rely heavily on our local partners to be able to answer questions about local incentives or sites or infrastructure, and to a high degree, there are higher ed questions in here that can only be answered by our KBOR institutions. And so we have to be able to move rapidly, all of us, if Kansas is going to be able to continue to win at the level that we have in the past. So the point is not to make anybody feel uncomfortable or to be critical just for the sake of criticism. The point is for all of us, particularly our department, to get better. And I think getting better collectively requires a clear articulation of where we see the challenges. And the speed issue is a huge one. I mentioned that we put some dollars into establishing front doors at the state universities. And I'm pleased with that project. We did about $5.5 million. Each institution took an approach that was the most culturally competent for their institution and that fit the competencies that they have and the strengths that they have and the businesses and partners that they're trying to reach. One challenge that we've seen is that I think we need better marketing of these front doors. We need to make sure that the front doors are on everybody's website so that it actually is a door and that it's actually in front. And but that is progress, and that's one of the goals that we put forth a couple of years ago when I was last here. So I want to thank our partners for their work there. So coming back to Regent Winter's question, what in the minds of private businesses that are considering expansion is the most negative perception they have about higher education in Kansas? I'm going to answer that as a professional economic developer. I'm going to answer that as someone who is regurgitating what I have heard time and time and time again from the businesses. And it relates to things that look like this. Maps like this and like this. And I recognize that I'm touching the third rail right now, but the question was asked and I'm answering it honestly. Businesses don't care about service areas. Businesses want to have their workers trained or certified, and they want it done quickly. They want it done at a reasonable cost, and they don't give a hoot about these colors on a map. Now, there are good, valid reasons for people to give a hoot about those colors on the map, but I'm the Secretary of Commerce, and I'm answering as such. This is a challenge for businesses. It is too complicated. It takes too long, is the perception. They don't want to navigate through all this. As an outgoing Commerce Secretary who's watched how things have gotten better, there are a few things that keep me up at night, one of which is we have not been able to achieve the rate of population growth in Kansas that we need. We have been below 3 million forever. We need to have the kind of growth that we saw in the Sun Belt 30 years ago with Phoenix and Austin, that now is being experienced in Nashville and markets like that. That's what we're working toward. But our population has remained flat. The demographic trends aren't great, as I think everybody in this room knows. I think, and we need to have a conversation about definitions perhaps here, which is one of the challenges of translating how we evaluate success at Commerce versus how higher ed institutions may evaluate it. It looks like, based on the data that we have, about 12,500 of our higher ed grads leave Kansas every year. And that keeps me up at night. However, this is and has been a very successful selling point for us as a state, because every state in the country has a talent shortage of some type. And the site consultants know this, the companies know this. So we are able to say to companies, hey, last year we had 12,500 of our grads leave the state for other markets. You bring these jobs here, we've got the people. Mm-hmm. They're trained up, they're ready to go. And we think they'll stay in Kansas if you create the economic opportunities for them to. So we are selling this, but should it still be cause for concern? Absolutely, it should be. And then AI. We're at the beginning of a revolution. We don't quite know, none of us know what that is going to look like, but it's changing by the week, by the month. And I am concerned that many of our institutions may not be designed or equipped or have the organizational cultures to be able to respond as nimbly and creatively as they need to. So we know that our four-year institutions, the research that's happening there is creating new opportunities, new jobs for tomorrow, and our community and technical colleges are filling those jobs. What we want to make sure, though, is that there is easy collaboration between the 2 years and the 4 years around curricula, around what these research findings are, so that our training partners, if community college is a training partner to a company, they've got the most cutting edge research at their fingertips, and they can make sure that they are equipping those workers that they're training. I don't think the many of the approaches that we've been taking to try to connect our graduates with jobs are working. Morgan Erickson, there she is. So Morgan graduated from KU in December. She's from Minnesota. We want her to stay in Kansas. I hired her as my special assistant because my previous one got married and moved to Korea, and I needed somebody for 1 year, and she was graduating mid-year, so it was a good time. And what I have heard is that the old model of a career fair being a bunch of companies set up a table and you know the students are walking around from table to table, that isn't working. I'm excited about the idea of reverse career fairs where you're taking 100 students from a particular program at an institution, and you take them to 3 companies that are in that field, and you get them exposed and you allow those conversations to happen in the places where they might actually be employed. We have not done a good enough job on internships either, and I take responsibility for that at Commerce. Internships are a great way to retain our young people. Morgan was an intern for the Department of Commerce before she graduated, and so we already had a relationship, and there's a stickiness factor that we got because of that internship. We need to have the same level of success with internships in Kansas as we've had with registered apprenticeships, which have just gone through the roof. I don't think anyone will disagree maybe with this high level, but it's still a sensitive thing to say, but I'm not running for anything, so I'm going to say it. There are literal and figurative territories that exist among institutions which hurt our ability to grow the Kansas economy. There are silos that exist even within institutions, particularly our larger universities, that are very challenging to overcome, even within departments. And I put 2 worried on here because there's a lot of fear that I've sensed from institutions, particularly community colleges, as an example, that are worried about enrollment trends. They're worried about what might be happening in Topeka. What does higher ed funding look like? It is not a good look when you're worried. As a state, we work very hard to project strength, to project competence, to project a can-do ability to businesses, and to have an abundance mindset. And I have seen firsthand a number of times kind of a scarcity mindset that exists. And I'm sure there are folks sitting here thinking, yeah, well, if you'd fund us better, then we wouldn't have that. That's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a worldview. I'm talking about a lens. And so we need to project a different type of confidence and competence. The fact of the matter is, there are other states and other institutions around the country that are doing things that we aren't, and we're doing some things that they aren't too. But I hope that we have a culture collectively in Kansas where we are seeking out the best ideas, the best approaches, the best talent, and working to bring all of that to our state. And so where there are better ideas, let's R&D, rip off and duplicate those ideas here in Kansas. Everybody needs to be, again, I'm talking as a Commerce Secretary here, going back to the point about what are each of your institutions uniquely good at. This is like an elevator spiel, and it shouldn't just be at the community college president level or the university president level or the technical college president level. I'm talking about every faculty member, every chair and dean need to be able to say, this is what we do uniquely well. Here's the value proposition that we can bring your business. And it's incumbent upon my team at the Department of Commerce to make sure that we know all that and that we can regurgitate it as well when we're talking to a company that we just met in Chicago or in New Jersey or in Cologne, Germany, or Tokyo or Seoul. We had a great example of how things work extremely well last year, or I don't know if it was last year or the year before. I was in Vietnam, and we had a conversation with a company, a dairy-related company, that was interested in establishing operations in North America. And we were the first U.S. state to have visited that company. And so we're out prospecting. And I was able to say, Kansas State has an incredible dairy program. I'd like to get you in contact with them. And I called President Linton and Dr. Stewart and the team. I think 6 weeks later, somebody was on a plane. That was you. Okay, thank you, Mr. President. He was on a plane to Vietnam to meet with this company. That's how it's supposed to work. The problem is, I can't name the next 3 or 4 things that are what K-State is the best at, and I should be able to. And that goes for all of the institutions that are here and in the audience. And so I'm responsible for that. I think we're all responsible for doing a better job on that. I end here, and then I'm happy to stand for questions. And I've been saying this a lot. Do we want to win? Do we want to have the type of growth that we've seen in places like the Sun Belt, in places like Nashville that are absolutely booming, where young people from across the country are flocking to these markets because there are great jobs there? There are innovative companies that are exciting to work for, where there's a high quality of life, and do all the hard things that include the many uncomfortable points that I have made here today, but really tackle them. Or, well, look good losing. I happen to believe the culture that I've heard from KBOR, and I know from all the executive leadership in this room, is we want to win. But we have got to drive this down farther. We've got to have some uncomfortable conversations about structures that are 100 years old, that might not make sense in an economy that's about to be radically transformed by AI. And we've got to make sure that data and the facts are what are driving us. So with that, Mr. Chairman, Regents, thank you for the opportunity. I'm happy to stand for questions.
Incredible. Questions for the Lieutenant Governor? I want to go back to what you said early about essentially needing an asset inventory of the different advantages of our institutions. And I think we're in a good position to be able to produce that because we're one system. And to your point about the need for speed, I think one of the advantages Kansas offers is when a prospect comes, they're dealing with one system instead of multiple ones. So what is the best way, what format can we get that asset inventory to you for you and your team?
I will have Romaine Redmond, the director of our Office of Innovation, follow up on the mechanics of how to do that. And while I have been stressing speed, I will also stress here it's really important that we get this right, because we don't want a list of 20 things from each of you. We want the 5 that you are uniquely good at, where you're nationally and internationally known, and then the 5 after that where you're ascending and you're on the way. This is really not intended to be a show and tell, a brag thing. This is, what can we do for business? What are we uniquely positioned and have a unique capacity to be able to accomplish for companies that are already here, that want to grow here, but who are being wooed by other states? And then those companies that we are recruiting, whether from around the country or around the globe, to choose Kansas.
Well said. Regent Brasker.
Chair Benson, and thank you so much for your presentation, Lieutenant Governor. I know you are a huge proponent for registered apprenticeships, and you've touched it a little bit, but between the universities, they're employing students who are apt for registered apprenticeships, and that brings them closer to certifying for the industry, that they have done the work, not only have the certificate of graduation and certificate from these reputed universities, but also they have work experience with registered apprenticeship. Do you want to touch a little more on that topic?
Yeah. I mean, being able to have earn and learn opportunities is a proven strategy for retaining talent in a state and in a company, for that matter. And I happen to believe that with internships, we can do the same thing. It's a different model, but I'd like to see us do more. I take responsibility from the commerce end for not having pushed internships quite as hard as what we have with registered apprenticeships. I mean, we're top 20 now in the country. We're in the 40s when we got started, but Governor established the Office of Registered Apprenticeship, which has been able to shine a light on this issue and get some resources that we wouldn't have otherwise had. And it's been a very productive effort. But we need the same focus on internships in Kansas so that we can have more people like Morgan from Minnesota get into an employer, the Department of Commerce. And after she graduates, she comes back to Commerce, and we hope she'll stay in this department and in this state.
Thank you.
I believe Regent Wolfmore had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, thank you for your incredible service over the past, well, how many years? You didn't start
7.
out. 7 years. You've done a phenomenal job. So I'd like to express my appreciation. Second of all, thank you for being so direct. I think that's very helpful. We don't always know where we could improve, and I really and really appreciate and take to heart your comments. I would like to give one little shout out. I know all of our universities do this to a certain extent, but when you talk about internships, Wichita State does a fabulous job. Every student has applied learning, and you talk about the stickiness when they go to work for one of those institutions, and the employer when they do their internship, which often are paid, the employer likes them, they like the employer, they're likely to stay and work for that. So they're doing something incredible. And like I said, I think many of our universities do that. So, but appreciate the direction, and we have work to do.
Oh, thank you, Regent Wolfmore. And I would echo, WSU has the highest retention rate on, I know, engineering grads specifically, because of those internships. And you've got the companies, there's that close alignment. But it takes years to establish that. And, I think part of the challenge that we have to overcome, and I say this as a 7th generation Kansan,
Sure.
Who's very proud of our state and who also feels like I understand our state, having spent, my life growing up in small town Kansas and being able to come back to small town Kansas as an adult. Too often we evaluate success based on how far someone gets from Kansas. So a parent can say, well, my boy's in New York City. And is that something to be proud of? Sure. But is it also something to be proud of that your son or daughter is working in Scott City and doing great things there in our state? So there's a Kansas humility and a cultural thing that we need to work on. You think about, and I've gotten a fair amount of criticism for saying this, but again, I'm not running for anything, so I don't care. Don't mess with Texas. Texas, they are ridiculously proud of their state, and they don't allow anyone to say anything bad about it. And if you stay in Texas, that's a great thing. Just like it's fine, I guess, if you go be a Yankee and live in Boston. Well, we need the same level of pride, and we need the same level of alignment with the job opportunities, and just encouraging our kids, hey, we'd love to have you stay in Wichita. We'd love to have you stay in Kansas City or Iola or wherever you're from, and go get educated and come back. Stay here. So there's a lot of layers to this.
I
But
love that. Thank you very much.
thank you.
Final question, Regent Crocker.
Thank you, Chair Benson. Thank you, Lieutenant Governor, for your very thought-provoking presentation. I really loved your comment about R&D and the definition to that. And so my question is, as you are competing with other states to land companies, you talked about the need for a coordinated education system. What states stand out in your mind as being those that we can R&D?
I'm not sure I'm able to evaluate the higher ed systems in other states. I can tell you the states that we compete hardest against for these large projects are North Carolina. We've had Iowa as a challenger. Missouri, but that has more to do with geography and kind of Kansas City metro. And then Arizona is a very strong competitor of ours. So these states, to varying degrees, have been able to figure out the secret sauce that you need on that alignment, and have had, we go toe to toe against them pretty consistently.
Well, Lieutenant Governor, thank you again for your leadership. Thank you for your partnership, and we look forward to continuing that into the future. So big round of applause for Lieutenant Governor Toland. Thanks, Jerry. Thank you. And we felt it would be timely to coincide the Pillar 3 presentations from the research universities, and we'll hear the regional Pillar 3 reports in May. But on the heels of Lieutenant Governor's comments, just to talk about Pillar 3, which relates directly to economic development, and dive into what our institutions are doing to contribute to economic development and really drive innovation in our state. So President Linton, if you don't mind, we will ask Kansas State to KU's. Oh, my apologies. Okay, stand down. So it sounds like the University of Kansas.
We're gonna go.
Okay. So we will invite the University of Kansas to give their Pillar 3 report first this afternoon.
Mike, there we go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Trish Bergman is going to present for us, and thank you for allowing her to go first. She doesn't plane to catch to go to Notre Dame for an economic development project. So
fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chairman Benson. Good to see you all again. I have to respond a little bit to Secretary Toland here. Partner.ku.edu is a website that has been launched directly for industry. Embedded within the website is a chatbot. So if there are questions that they still don't get answers to after they go through the website, they can go to the chatbot and ask specific questions. I will also say, though, guilty as charged, it took me an extra week to respond to the survey. So thank you again. I want to start first by setting the table a little bit from an economic impact perspective. For fiscal year 23, we had Lightcast do an economic study of the University of Kansas, the whole University of Kansas. And in that study, they concluded the impact to the state of Kansas was $7.8 billion. This was for FY23 data. That's a significant amount of impact from a university perspective. In their analysis, they look at individual impacts be it in operations, research, startups, visitors spend, student spend, alumni spend, and construction spend. They look at all of those components and sum them together. I would say that Lightcast is very conservative in their approach. They think about this, and you'll see words of added income. They think about it in that fashion, and what they mean when they say added income is, what if KU did not exist? What's the impact? And that's their definition of it, very different than more of a traditional sales approach to it. So we talked about students being part of that analysis. In last year, our student enrollment has grown significantly and is the highest it's ever been. For freshmen last fall, we are the third highest. In addition to enrollment figures, though, we now also have the highest retention and graduation rates in history. LICAS, again, as part of their study, looked at the annual rate of return for KU grads, and they calculated that to be 22.3% of their investment to go to school at KU. In comparison, the US stock market over a 30-year rate of return is 10%. We're roughly 2x that from a student perspective. I'm going to transition us a little bit to research. Research is growing every year at KU. Over the course of the last 10 years, we have continued to grow. Last year, fiscal 25, we were at $610 million, a 12% increase over FY 24. Every year, the National Science Foundation puts together what they call the HERD data, Higher Education Research and Development. There's 900 universities that they tabulate that information for. Half of those are public institutions. We rank in the top 10% for both total and federally funded research expenditures, which is a significant achievement. Okay, let me go backwards. How do I go backwards? Okay, sorry about that. In addition, we also have asked the Institute for Research and Innovation in Science, it's IRIS, it's another independent body to think about our economic impact. And they take our data that we give them, our raw data, and what they've concluded is that for FY25, 5,700 KU researchers had some of their salary supported by research. It's 5,700. That includes graduate students. It includes undergraduate students. It includes faculty and research scientists. In addition, across 78 Kansas counties, those research dollars that we brought into the state, 87.7 million of it gets invested in related goods and services, things that we need to buy to do part of that research. So again, investments back into the state of Kansas through the research dollars that we're able to bring in. Building on that last slide, if you look at the last 5 years, we've invested over $600 million worth of goods and services into the national economy. 25% of those are going to small businesses. Research dollars by and of themselves are a direct contributor to both the state and national economy. The next few slides, I'm going to dive into some of our research activities, and these are going to be some of the strengths that Lieutenant Governor Tolan was speaking to. The first area I'm going to touch upon, our first engine, so to speak, is around earth, energy, and the environment. Our state surveys, the biological survey and the geological survey, completely align with this theme by exploring and gaining an understanding of our vegetation systems, as well as our water and energy resources. We have long-standing industry consortia at KU underneath this theme. Industry members join consortia. They pay to join consortia to have access to talent, as well as providing insights into technical challenges they are facing that our research can help them solve. I'm going to touch on one of the programs that's a rather large program, specifically within this area, Environmentally Applied Refrigerant Technology Hub, or EARTH. This is a National Science Foundation program, $26 million over 5 years, the opportunity to renew it for a second 5 years, so a total of $52 million. This is focused on sustainable, accessible refrigeration and air conditioning innovations that really are going to have a lasting impact for us. There are convergent research areas that are part of this. They touch on reclaiming and repurposing refrigerants, developing new refrigerants, as well as developing more energy efficient systems. One application might be data centers and the need to cool data centers. Earth has a very broad stakeholder network. It's important to have voices at the table. Community colleges, technical schools, trade unions, industry, professional societies, national labs, and others. As part of our innovation ecosystem, we also have a fee-based industry consortia, currently composed of 16 industry partners across the full refrigerant value chain. Earth, led by KU, is joined by 5 other academic institutions. Our metrics directly align with the Kansas Science and Technology Strategic Plan and cover talent and workforce, innovation, job creation, research and policy, as well as an aspirational goal to develop a large-scale testing facility in Kansas that would provide third-party validation on new refrigerant systems. I want to touch on, again, talking about research, I now want to touch on some innovation spotlights, right? Commercialization spotlights. Both enterprises up here, Icorium and Avium, started with a PhD graduate student in the middle of their degree journey, working with their faculty advisor to develop a commercialization concept. Both teams individually did customer discovery, market validation. They applied for a small business innovation, small business tech transfer funds, and were very successful. Icorium has also raised seed money and is in the process of raising substantial funding to support development of a full-scale commercial operation. Avium has a large DOE grant that's focused on, and they're focused very much on meeting their deliverables before proceeding to the next step. Both of these companies are in Lawrence. Both of these companies want to stay in Kansas where they can continue to grow their enterprises with high-quality, high-paying jobs. The next engine I want us to think about, next area of strength for KU, is around safety and security. 10 to 15 years ago, the School of Engineering made a conscious decision to lean into cybersecurity. And this has led to DHS and the NSA recognizing our centers of excellence in both academics as well as in research. KU also has a very strong military-affiliated program. We have 2,300 military students. That's 7.5% of our enrollment. We train hundreds of service members in our DoD language centers and regional area study centers, as well as training Kansas police officers, firefighters, and EMS workers across the state. Senator Moran has supported the KU Innovation Park with a federal investment for the Kansas National Security Innovation Center that'll be part of Phase 4 of the KU Innovation Park. Speaking a little bit to research, and in safety and security, you can't always highlight all of the programs for a variety of reasons, but I picked one that you can think about. This is Kansas Geological Survey. Back in the 80s and 90s, they were asked by the state to better understand the sinkholes that were occurring in western Kansas. What was causing them? And the mining operations was the answer to that question. But working on this for a number of years, the U.S. Army, as well as the Border Patrol, came to the KGS and said, could you do something more than just thinking about sinkholes? Are there other applications that would be of value for us? And after $20 million worth of funding, they were able to devise technology that now looks for drug tunnels, looks for escape tunnels from an immigration perspective, were used in Afghanistan around terrorist tunnels. This advanced technology now has come full circle and is back in the state thinking about our transportation systems. And are there things that we need to be concerned about or working on to improve those? So using federal dollars to advance technology that then comes back to play a role in the state. Touching on a couple innovation spotlights in this space. The NSA developed technology specifically for submarines, but they understood that it had commercial application. They reached out to Dr. Perry Alexander, a collaborator of theirs, who they knew worked in a similar space, and they said, Perry, we've got this technology. Do you want to start up a company? Perry, having done this once before, said, I don't want to do this right now. That's not the right thing for my career. But he introduced them to the Innovation Park. The park licensed the technology from the NSA. The park then started up a company. That company now has raised $3.5 million in seed money. They exist at the park. KU and Invery are working closely with the NSA to further that technology in great ways. The second example up there is Pulse Aerospace, and that's a KU graduate, came out of the aerospace engineering department. He started up a company when he came out around unmanned aerial systems. That company then was acquired by AeroVironment, a California company. They are now expanding their activities in Lawrence. They want to stay in Lawrence. Senator Moran is very much a supporter of AeroVironment and the activities. They have roughly 20 people. They have a federal opportunity that would get them to in the 30 to 35 folks. Our third area that I think is important for us to think about as an engine and should be no surprise to anybody in this room. The medical center and the various schools of nursing, health professions, and medicine certainly drive healthcare in Kansas City, throughout the state, and throughout the region. In addition, the School of Social Welfare each year spends in the neighborhood of 140,000 hours, voluntary hours, of providing social services to Kansans all across the state. This is part of their degree program. The Lifespan Institute has broad expertise researching and disseminating information on topics related to human health and development. KU Medical Center is home to the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, one of 35 designated centers by the National Institute for Aging. The Alzheimer's Center has developed diagnostic biomarkers that lead to early detection, which will allow more early stage preventative treatment. The Cancer Center, one of 57 designated comprehensive cancer centers in the U.S., is aggressively leading the way to new treatments and advancements that benefit our state and the region. Highlighting just one of their programs that reaches every corner of the state is the Masonic Cancer Alliance, a key extension arm of the Cancer Center that provides rural and underserved Kansans an opportunity for state-of-the-art treatment. Thinking of the healthcare innovation engine, there's a couple of examples for you. Back in 2017, a unique public-private partnership was formed between BioNovus Innovations and KUMC's Institute for Advancing Medical Innovations. This collaborative goal is to build a strong translational research enterprise that can take basic discoveries from the laboratories, translate them into drugs and therapeutic devices, manage animal testing and clinical trials, and get them in the hands of enterprises that can take them to market. In addition, and many of you I'm sure have heard over the past few weeks, there was a newly announced public-private partnership between the health system, the medical system, Children's Mercy, and BAMP Health. Theranostics is a new precision medicine approach to care that is using the same targeted system to both find disease in bodies as well as treat it more precisely using radiopharmaceuticals. This collaborative partnership will bring new treatment advancements to both adults and children in the region. Throughout this talk, I've intentionally tried to embed examples of innovation that highlight the research that's going on at the institution. But I want to spend a few more minutes here. There's a lot of data on this slide. We recognize, and I think the examples I've shown, is that individual sectors are each unique and often have different models to advance innovations. The technology sectors on this slide also originate solely from research. And you can see biotech, medtech, and industry tech all align with the research engines that I spoke about. The metrics for each sector allow us to understand where we've had success, allow us to think about where we might have success in the future. That middle one of digital tech is relatively low from an inventions to startups perspective, but digital tech is an area that we absolutely believe is going to grow going forwards. KU startups have been and will continue to be an important contributor to high-quality, high-wage jobs in Kansas. The KU Innovation Park is one of our strategic commercialization partners. Since its inception, the park has seen steady growth. Currently has 77 companies and over 800 direct jobs. The park is currently building Phase 4, a 105,000 square foot facility that will house companies interested in security and sustainability. The target of 4,000 jobs in 10 years includes plans for additional buildings that will be integrated into the crossing at KU on West Campus, which is a mixed-use live, work, play environment. In support of our innovation ecosystem, the park, and through the help of funding from the Forge Grant, launched last year the Oriad Angel Investor Network, which is a KU-focused investor community that has to date invested approximately $800,000 in our KU-affiliated startups. Shifting to capital investment and priority areas, we certainly have a number of large capital investment programs that are underway at KU. Kansas City has the Cancer Center. Lawrence and Douglas County, we've got the Gateway District, the entrepreneurial hub that's right in the middle of campus, and then the Crossing at KU, which is on West Campus and is where KU Innovation Park resides. What we've walked through quickly should have hopefully shown how research supports our economy while also driving innovation and commercialization. State support of the research enterprise across our institutions would accelerate economic impact across our state and our region. It will cause jobs to be created, just like the examples that I've highlighted in this talk. Strategic area of investment should be no surprise. They're going to align with those areas that, again, that I highlighted in terms of cancer, Alzheimer's, energy. But we've also added in high-performance computing. High-performance computing brings in that AI element that Secretary Tolan mentioned, and it really is in support of all of the activities that we do and is a horizontal that crosses our verticals. That concludes our report. Thank you for your time.
Great information. Any questions? Yes, Regent Johnston.
You have to press kind of hard.
There we go. Okay. Thank you for that, and I appreciate it. Could you speak just briefly? One of the things I think I've heard either from the secretary and I think from you briefly was the challenge of helping our researchers understand the commercial opportunities before them, that what they're doing has the commercial application potentially. Could you just speak briefly for the board's benefit as to how you're doing that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I would go at the core of that is culture. And so we have to bring these examples to the faculty at KU. They've got to be able to begin to see the potential. I think the graduate students that we have today also are encouraging their faculty advisors to think more about this. They as well can drive that conversation in a very strong way. We have a cross-campus innovation and entrepreneurial working group composed of faculty and innovators, including alumni as well as endowment. And we talk about how do we change that culture? What are the gaps that we need to go solve? Again, another thing that Forge did for us was it gave us proof of concept funding. So you could take those technologies that they've been working on in research that are still early stage, and with small money, $25,000, $35,000, take them to the next step. And again, showcasing that sort of activity and what can be done there. We're working in collaboration with K-State and UMKC on a Kaufman project that's really thinking again about how do we move things out into the marketplace better. It again has innovation and growth funds associated with it because that is key. That is really key for us to move this forwards. And I think when faculty begin to see that, they see, oh, I can take my research to that next level. And that's important. I would also say that many of the federal opportunities that we're seeing today have translation embedded within them. So you're also seeing conversations coming out of DC that really are encouraging who's going to pull this forwards. And I think all of this is together. It needs to be worked on.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for the question.
Yeah.
Great information. All right. Thank you again.
Thank you.
All right. Next up, K-State.
Thank you, Chairman Benson and the rest of the board. I'd like to introduce our team that's going to present the report. Today, it's Jessica Canad and Jennifer Tidball.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, welcome.
Thank you, President. All right, waiting on our slides here. Well, good afternoon, Chairman Benson and members of the board. I am pleased today to provide Kansas State University's fiscal year 25 progress under the Prosperity Pillar. All right, so in reviewing our 25 outcomes, I want to briefly highlight the strategic alignment that helped guide K-State's work. K-State's economic development efforts align with the Kansas Framework for Growth, the Board of Regents Building a Future Plan, and then also K-State's Next Gen strategy. So all of that built together help us to produce our Pillar 3 report. So within the university, this work is also coordinated centrally through the Office of External Engagement, ensuring that research, industry partnerships, and workforce development and the extension engagement are aligned with the state's economic priorities. So I'm really pleased to talk about our fiscal year 25 performance. Here are the core metrics that reflect direct results generated through university partnerships and our industry collaboration. So for fiscal year 25, you can see that we are reporting 737 direct jobs or retained jobs, and we also see $21.5 million in leveraged capital investment connected to the university activity. So one thing I want to mention about this is that Regents universities have had the flexibility over the last 2 years to really refine and define how this process works. And it has helped us to define the metrics that are reported today. And we also handed out a copy of our report. If you flip over to the back of that report and open up the first page, you're going to see some of our specific definitions that have helped to guide the work over the last 2 years. And so that's definitely been a work of progress. And I'm really proud to say that centrally locating that through the Office of External Engagement, through the Office of the President, has greatly helped our efforts. So we've approached this effort in reporting our metrics very deliberately, and we have decided that we need to make sure that we have direct and verifiable outcomes to provide to you. So we know that what we have reported here today have that direct, measurable economic impact that are deeply connected to K-State's efforts and partnerships across the state. So also in fiscal year 25, and also aligning with those core metrics, we have several indicating metrics that show that 74 businesses or ventures were created through university-related entrepreneurship activities. And then we've also secured $112.6 million in philanthropic support. So one thing I want to talk a little bit is about our research expenditures. K-State has experienced significant movement in national research rankings. In fiscal year 25, K-State reported nearly $280 million in research expenditures, and that is placing K-State 77th among public institutions and remains in the top 15% nationally in research. This research momentum matters because it helps us to fuel discoveries, industry partnerships, and that innovation that ultimately drives the economic growth that we've talked about quite a bit today with Lieutenant Governor as well. So this is one of my favorite slides, the ROI of a K-State degree. Simply put, a K-State degree is worth it. Our work ultimately contributes to the talent pipeline across the state, and including our Kansas employers and businesses. So 97% of K-State graduates are either in the workforce or continue on to a graduate degree within their first 6 months. We also see that within 1 year, 67% of our K-State graduates meet or exceed the Kansas median salary, which is about $60,000. And most importantly, what I love is that 50% of K-State graduates decide to stay in Kansas, build their families, and build their careers right here. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the economic engines that have helped drive this work. I'll also refer to the full report. If you check out section 2, pages 5 through 8, we go through several examples of the amazing economic engines that K-State has. But for sake of this report today, I'm going to highlight 4 of them. The first is our rural veterinarian and health access. Many rural communities face significant shortages in veterinarian services, and this affects livestock health, this affects food systems, and long-term economic stability of ag communities. So what we've done is we have developed these mobile and community-based service models, and K-State works with dozens of partners across the state to expand veterinary access while also providing hands-on training for our students and future veterinarians. So in fiscal year 25 alone, we have seen 5,200 procedures that were delivered through these partnerships. All right, so I absolutely have to talk about the economic engine that is K-State Extension. K-State Extension continues to serve the university statewide and is our primary delivery mechanism. In fiscal year 25, Extension recorded more than 900,000 direct contacts, and we know that we have over 266,000 volunteer hours across the state in all 105 counties. All right, so the third economic engine that I want to mention is K-State 105. K-State 105 served as the university's economic development and partnership platform during a 2-year period. So fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 25. So through partnerships, K-State 105 helped to contribute to 1,000 jobs created or retained, 660 businesses were established or expanded, and we saw more than $12 million in matching funds leveraged, and that is up against the state's $10 million of investment that they gave us. So if you're keeping track here, that's $22 million of impact in those 2 years. State funding for the K-State 105 initiative concluded in fiscal year 25, but the partnerships, the outcomes, and this work continues to be measured. The fourth economic engine I will mention is TDI. This is the Technology Development Institute, and they are this really amazing shop in Manhattan, Kansas, but they serve the entire state through engineering. They do prototyping, they do technical assistance, and this is a place where Kansas's businesses can get K-State's expertise. So together, these engines demonstrate K-State connects research, expertise, and statewide partnerships to measurable economic outcomes. So Lieutenant Governor talked about the Forge Grant, and we deeply thank his team for the opportunity to participate in this. So through the Forge Grant, K-State has expanded our efforts into 2 areas that I want to highlight. The first is what we've called Open for Business. This expands our corporate engagement and economic development partnerships centrally in one location alongside our K-State Research Foundation. This is the front door for our university. Second, through the benefit of the Forge Grant, we were able to launch the Wildcat Scholar. So this is a statewide resource guide that uses AI and makes it easier for companies, businesses, and communities to identify the right expertise at K-State. So if you think about a topic, whether it's childcare or water, you're going to be able to go onto our platform, similar to the one that KU has, and find out who's the best presenter, who's doing research in water, but most importantly, how do I connect with them? So this helps us align also this whole idea of the Forge Grant, of having the office, of having Wildcat Scholar. This helps us to align our tech transfer and commercialization a lot deeper. And what's really great is we work with the KU team quite a bit. In fact, a lot of us in this room were at the Game Changers and Championship yesterday, hosted at the KU campus to support Kansas-based startups. So that part has been really fantastic. So to talk a little bit more about another example of how K-State is positioning ourselves long-term for economic prosperity, I show one of my favorite slides as well, which is our innovation corridor that really kind of connects with the NBAF area. And I know a lot of you are really familiar with that. But together, we are adding additional district sites that are going to bring together more biosecurity research, more advanced bio in our innovation hub, and our animal science gateway. So together, the efforts behind all of this will help K-State's ability to attract additional research funding, to have deeper industry partnerships, and private investment while supporting new companies, new jobs, and innovation across Kansas. So I keep seeing that every one of my slides is my favorite slide, but this might actually be my favorite slide. As a land-grant university, K-State does a lot with community development. And so you see that reflected in our extension system. So for the purpose of the Pillar 3 reporting, we had to make a decision of how do we report on community development. As many of you know, community development doesn't start July 1st and doesn't end June 30th. So we took a strategic approach to reporting on this actual metric. We said, anything that is new in 25, anything that is excited, tell us about it. So across K-State, we had 15 different reporting streams come into us and say that we have done 129 unique activities in community development. And that goes from the Manhattan campus, Olathe, Salina. So I think as our reporting matures and as we kind of figure out the parameters on how to do this, we're really going to uncover some really exciting things happening across the state. So speaking about that statewide delivery and elevating extension, we also have been working with Extension the last 2 years to think about Pillar 3 and to think about what does economic prosperity do for extension and vice versa. So 2 things I want to highlight out of a lot of projects we could have highlighted. The first is our Connecting Entrepreneur Communities, and this is something that we did last summer. We brought together dozens of statewide partners and 130 entrepreneurs, and we immersed ourselves into Kingman, Kansas. And this was a really exciting 2-day event, but this was a place-based event that focused on small business development, entrepreneurship, and also community revitalization. So it was a really fun event. We're holding it again in June in Cortland, Kansas. So if you're interested, let me know. And then the last statewide delivery mechanism that really ties to Pillar 3 is our Regional Excellence Initiative, and we call this the REI. So working in deep partnership with Commerce and the Kansas Association for Regional Development Organizations, we put together a statewide initiative to activate the K-State Community Facilitator Network, and I could give an entire presentation about how amazing that network is. But what they've done is the facilitators helped these partners support regional planning and economic collaboration aligned with the Kansas Framework for Growth. So together, all of these examples illustrate how the university's statewide extension network translates into practical outcomes for Kansas communities. All right, so wrapping up here, thinking about some of our future initiatives, I'm just going to highlight a few here on the page for sake of time. The first is nuclear energy. This is really where K-State is expanding our research capacity, looking at workforce, and really having those deeper industry partnerships to advanced energy systems. So we've already talked a little bit about biomanufacturing and bioscience. The third one is one I probably have to read right from the notes. It's the Western Star Global Center for Grain and Food Innovation, because we have a brand new name to that facility. That's very exciting. This is scheduled to open in fall, and you will probably be hearing a lot more about that in the future. The fourth is biosecurity and biodefense. That is our NBAF, and that absolutely is something that drives economic prosperity for the state. And a couple updates there is we do know that K-State's going to be working with NBAF to help fill 150 positions that will be opening soon. And we are strategically working with them on military and recently exited military veterans to be able to connect some of those jobs. So that part's really exciting. And the last thing I'll talk about is the rural health transformation. So last December, Kansas secured more than $220 million in federal investment to strengthen rural health systems. And you might have heard about this. But what's fascinating about this project is that the Kansas's proposal named Extension and named K-State specifically as deployment partners of this work. So K-State, we will work with partners across the state, and we will be connecting food systems, which is our expertise. We're going to be deploying community health workers, and we are going to be connecting local food production into healthcare models. So that is just incredibly exciting. We think that this is going to really expand workforce and economic opportunities here in Kansas. So with that, Kansas State remains deeply committed to advancing economic prosperity in Kansas. We do this through research and extension, industry partnerships, and our capabilities and statewide collaboration. The outcomes that we reported today really reflect that commitment, and it demonstrates how K-State contributes to job growth, investment attraction, and long-term economic growth for our state. So that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great information. Thank you, Jessica. Any questions for Jessica? Yes, Regent Johnston.
Hey, I did it. So I'm familiar with the Rural Health Transformation Program and those dollars. I am curious whether today is the right forum for that or not. I'll let you think about. I would like to hear more about the extension role in food delivery to a healthcare application. That would be very interesting to me. I don't know if you can speak briefly about that, or if that's information you want to follow up on at a later date. I'll leave to you.
Yeah, I can give the headline on what was in the proposal. So Kansas State University was written into the proposal under Initiative 1.1, which actually is titled Accountable Food as Medicine. AFEM is the new lingo we're all going to have to learn here. So through Accountable Food as Medicine, the idea is that we are going to be working at the community level with health workers, and that KU will be working at the clinical level with clinical health workers, and that we will be creating a process so that this medical prescription or this medical indication will help people across Kansas have access to the ability to get, whether it's food prescriptions or medically tailored grocers, or just really connecting the dots. But where K-State comes in on the expertise there is really on the agriculture side. So it's the production of the food and the connectivity, and really it's about supply chain.
Cool. Thank you very much. That's helpful.
All right.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
On the advanced manufacturing, are you also considering digital twinning?
Oh, yes. So I probably am not the best person to speak to that.
As
And
long as it's on the agenda, that's great.
yes, that is correct.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you.
So I know I may be pushing some of you for a bio break, but we've got one more report to go. I think we're going to go ahead and just keep going. Wichita State, if you want to provide your Pillar 3 report, President Muma.
Yes, thank you, Regent Benson and Regents. I'm going to have Dr. John Tomlin, our Executive Vice President and Executive Director of National Institute for Aviation Research, to provide that and explain to you how your Pillar 3 priority is the same as our priority number 3 around economic development, and it's been embedded in our strategic plan since I was president. So, John, take it from here.
Sure. Mr. Chairman, so I do not want Regent Dicus talking about me with my 40-minute presentation. So I've changed my ways. It's going to be less than 10 minutes. Just hold on with your bio break. Yeah. I listened to Secretary Tolan, and he and I've talked about this a lot as far as, when we're at the Paris Air Show, went to the London Air Show, attracting companies, how we need to do things differently. And I got a comment from me about 3 months ago. I'm in the 4th floor of the Pentagon, and I was talking to 2 4-stars in the Air Force side, and they said, "What are you? You're not like any university that we know of. Are you the thing to come? Is that what universities are changing?" I said, and I told him, I said, "I don't know if I'm a unicorn or a trendsetter, but I think we're adapted to applied learning. We're delivering for the Defense Department." He's like, "Well, that's what we need to have been doing 20 years ago." So I think that the model we have, I think the president and I, we've kind of limited it to 1 a month. As far as other universities coming to see what we're doing. Just 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, we had the University of Tennessee system. So the chancellor was there, the president of the whole Tennessee system, saying, "How do you do what you do? Because we want to emulate you from the Tennessee system." So I think they left pretty amazed at what we're doing, and I'm pretty proud of what we're doing. I think The applied learning part, I know you mentioned the applied learning part that we have is our special sauce. That is our special sauce for the military. So getting on to pillar 3, this is our applied learning. I mean, 13,000 students earning $40 million. That's the punchline. So, they come through WSU and they don't only get a degree, but I heard you mention they get a resume too. So that resume, hopefully then we can keep them in Kansas. That's the primary goal. Our pillar 3, new jobs created, with the growth of NIAR and the growth of some rearranging of some of the aerospace industries. We had very good growth, 2,600 jobs in 26. So it's a lot. New direct investment, 680 million. Net gain is 2.4 billion, almost 2.5 billion dollars. So it's a lot going on in the Wichita region. It's another way to look at that is just in a pie graph and how that's related to NIAR growth and innovation campus growth. But I must tell you that this is a hard metric to track because this doesn't account for, you go ask somebody, tie your job directly to what the university is doing. And you go up to Boeing and you ask them that, and they're like, I have no idea. We got this new program. We'll give you 55 jobs. Okay, that's a guess. But this OEM growth linked to the research we're doing, I don't know if you can put a metric on that. I don't think we get it totally right. Attracting new companies to Kansas outside the original innovation campus, because we can capture the innovation campus part, but I don't think we capture everything else that's going on. I don't think they respond to the surveys. So I do think the number is actually low. So that's another thing. Our expenditures, I mean, this is we just reported our expenditures, our awards. We jumped over $630 million in awards last year. So $630 million in awards. Our expenditures always follow that. So we're right under $500 million in expenditures. That'll be reported next November. But we have a very large return on the state of Kansas investments. And I said our key to success is the applied learning and our internships. Our rankings, we're number 9 in overall engineering, number 1 in aerospace. And then if you look at the DoD, so this was, if you look back, and I mean, President Flanders and I know when we had the old days of K-Tech and that, I mean, we've been around enough that we used to rank ourselves and we had NSFF score in DoD and now I can say that I don't think we're going to be an F-score DoD state because we are number 4 in engineering DoD. So, and I think with some of the moves that we'll see, we'll be the number 1 engineering DoD house, which is a pretty big statement. If you think about UARCs and Georgia Techs and the John Hopkins of the world, but they're continuing to invest in us. This is one of the investments, which you guys, when you come down, I think the president or I have taken aboard the SAOC aircraft. It's the Survivable Airborne Operations Center for the president. 650 students working on this, undergrad students working on this program. And so that's where they get this comment. We don't normally see this kind of workforce working for the DoD and their students, and we're putting them to work to do this. So, and they're making money to do it. New contracts we have based on the DoD investments. I've showed you this sometime. Is tomorrow in Wichita, I have the entire United States bomber fleet with me. The PEOs from basically the platforms of the bomber. So you got the B-1, you got the B-52, you got the B-2, and then you got the new bomber, the B-21. So all those people are meeting at Wichita State tomorrow to talk about the future, how to keep our bomber fleet current. So these are a couple new programs. The black one, I don't want to mention in public, but I think I've mentioned to a couple of you privately that those are very large programs. I will be retired when those programs are still going on at Wichita State. So those are 20, 30-year programs. So they're going to be generational type programs. I want to highlight, I did this for the financial committee, but I want to highlight one program, B1. So it's just one aircraft platform. Asked the state of Kansas, will you invest $35 million to help us do this? They said, yes, we'll invest it over 7 years. That has changed what we do. Because if you look at that, there's 4 programs on there. I'm only allowed to say only one's public, and it's called Backbone. The other programs, if you look at those programs, they're bringing over the next 10 years, they're going to bring in $2.5 billion. Now, if you look at how much of that is done in Kansas, all of it. It doesn't go outside of our borders. And that's what the Department of Defense is. So I subcontract then 1.2 billion of that back out to the supply base in and around Kansas City and south, the 9-county region around Wichita to basically support that bomber fleet, making parts. So all the jobs of that $2.5 billion stay in Kansas. So, and I think that the DOD is now asking, well, we have such supply problems. Can you just do it for other bomber fleets, other platforms? So it's a great story because it's the Kansas work ethic. We just get the parts done. So I'm in closing, just where we're going in research growth. I like to lump sum it in digital transformation. You know, we have the ATF on campus. I never saw that one coming. So the National Laboratory for the ATF is on our campus now, doing digital crime. So I never saw that one coming. I always thought it was going to be robots and engineering, but never saw that one coming. Lots of virtual engineering work, additive, and this human factors with the biomedical. I think that is a huge area to be plowed. So we just opened, hopefully when you come in October, this is going to be one of your stops, is this Hub for Advanced Manufacturing and Research. We call it HAMMER. It just opened last week. We just moved 1,000 students into this building working. So it's immense to see, but it's the largest additive research facility in the United States of America. So, and we opened that up, and it's transformational what it does for our manufacturing community. Then the biomedical campus that's in a partnership with Wichita State and KU. I think that building is going up, and it changes the skyline of Wichita. And this is my last slide. I think all of you have seen what we do with the Innovation Campus. It was so successful of attracting industry. Why don't we just take the same recipe and do it again? And if you look, this is a swath of downtown Wichita where the biomedical campus is. We're going to do it again, and we're just going to build companies around the biomedical infrastructure, and just place it right in town. So I think that's it. I'll stand for questions.
All right, thank you, John. Yeah.
Any
questions?
Regent Dicus, did I do okay?
That was well done.
Well, if you're aiming for John Hopkins, they get $1 billion a year.
Yes, and so I'm after the engineering. Yes, ma'am. I know that's a big number.
All right, great presentation.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate it. All right, we have a quick, John Urie, we have a quick board member conflict of interest disclosure statement to cover, and then we'll take a break. So General Counsel Urie.
Thank you, Chair, members of the board. I don't know what page this is on in your materials, but Board of Regents policy governing board member conflicts of interest calls for disclosure of certain transactional interest, memberships, and affiliations at the time of taking office, and then subsequently as needs arise, and provides that the board will review those disclosures and make participation determinations in accordance with prescribed guidelines. So Regent Peter Johnston's disclosure form was reviewed by staff and taken up by the governance committee today. In accordance with board policy, the board's now to include the reported interest in the minutes of the board meeting, and with regard to each reported membership or affiliation on a governing board or affiliated corporation, to make determination regarding permissibility of serving in that capacity, and with regard to each contract or transaction, direct the involved regent to excuse himself from participating on behalf of the board in actions involving that contract or transaction. So Regent Johnston serves as a trustee on the KUN Endowment Association, which is a non-controlled affiliated corporation of the University of Kansas. and staff recommends approving Regent Johnston's continued service as a trustee of the KU Endowment Association. Service on boards of an affiliated corporation that exists to raise and manage funds for the respective educational institution is generally in line with the board's mission and goals and would be unlikely to constitute an actual conflict of interest and is more likely to be beneficial to an institution that potentially harmful to the board of the system. Regent Johnston's continued service on the body should be conditioned on his recognizing that his duty is first and foremost to the Board of Regents, and that if any actual conflict does arise, he would take appropriate action to manage or remedy that conflict. And then with regard to contracts or transactions, board policy requires that members disclose those. Regent Johnston is a shareholder in his law firm, which has client relationships with the Salina Regional Health Center, the Salina Regional Health Foundation, the Salina Airport Authority, and the City of Salina. Those clients have various contractual relationships with Regents institutions. Additionally, Regent Johnston's spouse is a part-time paid faculty member at the KU School of Medicine's Salina campus. Staff recommends directing Regent Johnston to excuse himself from participating on behalf of the board in matters involving or related to any contract or transaction between his firm's clients, and any educational institution governed, coordinated, or regulated by the board, and that any matters impacting or relating to his, also any matters impacting or relating to his spouse's employment at the KU School of Medicine's Salina campus. And
Thank you, John.
yes, the governance committee voted favorably with staff's recommendations.
Very good. All right, any questions? Would entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Okay, Regent Amar, second by Regent Wolf Moore. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thanks, John. Let's take about a 10-minute break and then we'll return at 3:40 for a work session. and resume the meeting and transition into more of a work session type format. Carved out some time this afternoon to discuss not proposed legislation anymore. It is legislation for us to consider. Maybe before we dive into the legislation itself, may ask John Ury to, especially since we have a couple of new board members, just refresh our memory on our policy and the board's role in terms of approving legislative requests. Go ahead and hit your mic. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair Benson. Board policy in Chapter 2F1 provides in part that all university requests for funds, programs, changes in legislation, and new legislation affecting the board and system institutions must be submitted to the board for approval. There's also a provision in that policy that says when legislation that would affect the system's operation is proposed by an entity other than the board determines whether the system will support that legislation, oppose it, or remain neutral.
Thank you, John. If you'll just stay close. What we were scheduled to discuss today was legislation that could address some statutory concerns that were presented by some of our institutions, statutory challenges. Felt like a week ago when we published the agenda that we were close enough that we could discuss it in a public work session. Understand a bill was filed this morning that does look different than what we thought that we were working with. So we wanted an opportunity to basically walk through the bill, what it does, allow board members to ask questions, and then obviously determine support or not. So, John, could you tell us a little bit about the bill that was filed this morning, please?
Yes, thank you. So this is House Bill 2798, introduced, I believe, in House Appropriations this morning. Section 1 of the bill would define research universities to mean the University of Kansas, Kansas State University, and Wichita State University, and then provide that pursuant to policies promulgated by the research universities and to the extent such policies involve the expenditure of state monies, also approved by the Board of Regents, research universities would have the power to do a number of things, execute contracts, buy, sell, and lease, and encumber and dispose of property, procure goods and services, so long as the university's policies have a competitive bid process, construct, maintain, and improve buildings, grounds, and infrastructure, and grant and convey right-of-way easements. Then also pursuant to policies promulgated by the research universities, and again, to the extent that the policy relates to statutory requirements from which the universities would be made exempt under the legislation, also then approved by the Board of Regents. Research universities would be exempt from first, laws, processes, or procedures regarding submission, review, planning, budgeting, or approval of capital expenditures pursuant to university policies approved by the Board of Regents. There'd still be the requirement to meet a nationally recognized fire code and have state fire marshal inspections for life safety inspections on capital projects prior to certification for occupancy. They would also be, the research universities would be exempt from laws, policies, processes, or procedures requiring submission, review, or approval of the procurement, purchase, or contracting for goods or services, or of any real property transactions, including leases, easements, licenses, transfers, and conveyances, pursuant to policies promulgated by the research universities and approved by the Board of Regents. Each research university would still be required to maintain a property inventory, and then no research university could be sold or merged with any other institution unless approved by the Board of Regents or the legislature. So that's all Section 1 of the bill. There are 29 sections. I can go through section by section. I've got a summary prepared for that if you'd like to proceed with that, or okay. So Section 2 of the bill would amend KSA 3737B through 3740C would say that those would not apply to research universities. These statutes establish powers and duties of the Division of the Director of Purchases within the State Department of Administration, and it's the competitive bid process and procedures for state purchasing. Section 3 of the bill provides that KSA 75, 3741, and 3742 would not apply to the research universities. Those statutes address bid processes for contracts for the construction of buildings or for major repairs or improvements to buildings. Section 4 of the bill this would provide that the provisions of State Surplus Property Act would not apply to the research universities. Section 5 of the bill is that the Board of Regents would be authorized to sell, convey, and transfer real estate to the Emporia State University, Pittsburgh State University, and Fort Hays State University foundations. It would no longer be statutorily authorized to participate in such transactions with the KU Endowment Association, the K-State Foundation, or the Wichita State University Foundation. Section 6, the Board of Regents would be authorized to grant right-of-way easements on land belonging to the state under the custody or control of the board, and could delegate such authority to the CEOs of Emporia State, Pittsburgh State, and Fort Hays State University. Section 7 would provide that laws addressing selection of architects, engineers, and land surveyors would not apply to the research universities. Section 8 would amend KSA 75-2131, which authorizes any agency head to grant right-of-way easements on land belonging to the state, and to provide that the section does not apply to the research universities. Section 9 would amend KSA 75-3043A, which requires appraisals to determine the market value before the state or any agency purchases or disposes of real property, to provide that that section does not apply to the research universities. Section 10 of the bill would amend KSA 75-3729, which requires the State Director of Accounts and Reports to direct the use of inventory records by all state agencies and to show the fixed and movable property of the state, and to provide that the section does not apply to the, this Section 10 would state that that section does not apply to research universities or that statute. Section 11 would amend KSA 75-3731A, which authorizes the State Director of Accounts and Reports to prescribe limitations and procedures relating to expenditures for official hospitality by agencies within the executive branch of state government, to provide that that section does not apply to the research universities. Section 12 would amend KSA 75-3743, which provides that whenever the Secretary of Administration or or any division head of the Department of Administration shall so require, contracts and leases of state agencies shall be approved as to form or execution by the Attorney General, and orders for requisitions for supplies, materials, and equipment be made on forms prescribed by the Director of Accounts and Reports, and that unless those purchase orders, well, there's some limited exceptions there, but that's what that one addresses. Section 13 would amend KSA 75-3044, which specifies requirements for contracts and purchase orders procured under the state competitive bidding law, including that certain contracts and purchase orders show that an appropriation fund or allotment has been encumbered for the full amount of the liability, to provide that the section does not apply to research universities. So that's the state's mechanism for making sure that budgeted funds don't get overspent, right? You identify the appropriation. That's a control of the Division of Accounts and Reports. Section 14 would amend KSA 75-3763, involving maintenance, repair, and upkeep and improvements of certain buildings of the sector by the Secretary of Administration, to provide that neither that section nor KSA 75-3764, which is Secretary of Administration contracts for the same things, apply to the research universities. Section 15 would amend KSA 75-3765 to exempt the research universities from statutes that allow the Secretary of Administration to assign space and facilities in all state-owned property or buildings in Shawnee County, and to assign space and establish a system for rents for buildings owned or controlled by the Department of Administration in other parts of the state. to require rents collected by the Department of Administration to be remitted to the treasurer, to require the secretary to receive 5-year building and space utilization plans from all state agencies, and to develop database of all state-owned or leased buildings and storage space with changes to be reported to the secretary, requiring agencies to cooperate with the data request and allow the secretary to assign space and facilities in the Capitol building, and authorize agencies to enter into written agreements with the secretary for use of space in office buildings. Section 16 would amend KSA 753768, which requires that charges for the use of state-owned parking facilities be remitted to the Secretary of Administration, to the state treasurer, with amounts credited to the Building and Grounds Fund, to provide that the section does not apply to the research universities. Section 17 would amend the statute authorizing the Secretary of Administration to contract for utilities for buildings and grounds under the care of the Secretary, to provide that that section would not apply to the research universities. Section 18 would amend KSA 7537115, which establishes the Kansas Quality Program within the Department of Administration, promoting the principles of total quality management within state agencies, to provide that that section does not apply to the research universities. Section 19 would provide that the research universities would not be subject to the Prison Made Goods Act. Section 20, the research universities would not be subject to KSA 755801 through 5807 regarding state procurement of engineering and surveying services. Section 21 of the bill is a corrective amendment to the State Surplus Property Act and not directly related to the research university's request. Section 22 would amend KSA 76756 to exclude the research universities and their endowment associations from authority granted in KSA, the following statute, 76757, for endowment associations to construct and otherwise improve buildings and facilities on state-owned property from private monies. The statute requires prior project approval from the Board of Regents and specifies that the improvements become state property upon acceptance by the Secretary of Administration. Section 23 would amend KSA 76769, which addresses procurement of goods and services and leases for state universities, to make it applicable to Emporia State University, Pittsburgh State University, and Fort Hays State University, but not to the research universities. Section 24 would amend KSA 76790 to make it applicable to Emporia State, Pittsburgh State, and Fort Hays State, but not to the research universities. This statute requires state universities to provide for the future annual maintenance and operation costs for improvements funded 51% or more with private money, and prohibits requests for state general fund monies to fund the maintenance of operations for such buildings that exceed the amount paid from the state general fund in 2007 for that purpose. Section 25 would amend KSA 767126 to exclude the research universities from Board of Regents-led procurement processes set out in KSA 767125 at SEC for construction of capital projects financed entirely from non-state money. Section 26 would amend KSA 7152, which authorizes state universities, upon specific authorization of the Board of Regents, to sell property gifted to the institutions, to provide that section would not apply to the research universities. Section 27 is a severability clause that is just common in bills. If a part is found unconstitutional by a court, then the rest of it would survive. Section 28 repeals affected statutes affected by the bill. And Section 29 would make the bill effective upon publication in the statute book.
Well, thank you, John, especially given that it was just filed this morning. I know you haven't had a chance to look, well, it sounds like you have had a chance to look through it, but appreciate you jumping on that so quickly and letting us know. I'm sure there are questions. Not sure exactly where we want to start, but John gave a pretty good rundown of the bill, so feel free to ask any questions. Regent Johnston.
Yeah, thank you. And John, thank you very much. I want to ask a question that's probably an oversight question, because it is a lot to digest really rather quickly. And it relates back to the section 26, I believe, relating to the endowment in section 5. I don't understand, and I don't understand the purpose of section 5, and particularly as it relates to section 26. If I understood you correctly, in section 5, the Board of Regents would no longer have a power that it has today, which is a power to convey property to the endowment associations of the research institutions. To what benefit would it be to prevent us from sending property to the research institutions foundations? I'm not understanding that.
I don't know the answer to the benefit of that. I just, my reading of section 5 is there's an existing authority of the board to do that for all 6 investment.
Okay, so my reading is, it matches yours, that it seems to be that there's an ability to convey property to the foundations associated with all 6 of the governed institutions. This legislation would restrict that and prevent the board from being able to make that conveyance as to the research institute.
Correct. I think that's probably speculation on my part, but it's probably a matter of perspective. If you're a research university and you're given these powers to contract in this bill, then you have the independent authority, the research university would have that authority, but the board would no longer have the express statutory authority to do that.
Okay, and then walk me through again section 26, then in light of that understanding or that.
So section 26 would amend KSA 767152, which authorizes state universities upon specific authorization of the Board of Regents to sell property gifted to the institutions. And it would provide that section does not apply to the research universities. So
Yeah, okay.
the regional universities would have that authority and could come to the board and get authorization to do that. The research universities would have the independent authority to contract and would not need to come to the board.
Got it. Thank you.
And so do I understand, John, on the first page, section 1B, just to make sure I'm reading it correctly. The oversight from the Board of Regents would only to the extent the expenditure of state monies. So if something was privately funded, we would not have a role.
So yes, for section B, which is B1 through 5, which lay out the authorities of the research universities, the powers of the research universities. There would be board policy to the extent that those policies involve the expenditure of state monies. Yeah, so the board would approve policies to that extent. There would be other research university policies that don't involve those things that would not be subject to board approval.
Can I follow up on that, Mr. Chairman?
Certainly.
What if the project does not involve public monies, but involves state
Okay.
assets?
Assets. That's my question as well.
The bill as written does not make that distinction for state assets. It just says for the expenditure of that policies involving the expenditure of state monies. So if it involved a state asset but didn't involve the expenditure of state monies, there would not be board policy approval of the policies impacting that in these areas B1 through 5.
And if I can jump in,
please.
Thank you. Page 3, lowercase f, top of the page, line 3. No research university shall be sold or merged with any other institution unless approved by the state board or the legislature. I can see where you can't sell an entire campus, but what about a building? Is that prohibited in here as well?
There's no prohibition from selling a building in the bill.
I have a sideline question on if somebody slips and falls in this building, legally, who's responsible if they sue?
If somebody slips and falls in
On the
the
building,
building that we're
the
in,
private investment has come in just out of nowhere. And private investment came in to the university and they built a building or redid a building. Somebody slips and falls there. Who are they suing?
well, I would assume that they would sue, most plaintiffs sue everybody they can, so
Yes, of
probably,
course. True.
probably the state and the university
But
and
not the
Board of
private
Regents and,
investment people. People who are private.
it's possible they could have, if someone were the XYZ building or operations were going on for that building, they'd probably go for them too. So.
And I want to make sure people that may be watching, John didn't author the bill. We're just asking. I realize there could be some questions that you can't answer. And so you're obviously our counsel and incredible at it. So appreciate you letting us ask you these questions about the bill. So Regent Wolfmore.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the presentation. So I think I understood this right. So this bill, we have oversight only the part that is state money, which if, for example, I don't know, let's say it's around 14%, I think with KU. So on the other 86% of the business they do, it sounds like there would be no oversight because there's no board that's overseeing any of the rest other than that 14%, correct?
I do think it's a fair assessment to say they would be largely autonomous in those areas that are not state funded, because it's not that they might not have university policy over those things, but
Right.
those policies, they'd be exempt from statutes, and then there would be no board role in policies as I read it.
Because I'm thinking of even like a private business, everyone has a board of directors, they're responsible to the shareholders. In this case, even though it's not state money, it's tuition money, and there's no oversight over that really 86% of the operations or the money. Sounds like to me.
I don't know that, yeah, I don't know that there couldn't be some other functions for
Go ahead, Chance.
various.
Good, and maybe I misunderstood this as well, because we're all seeing this fairly fresh. So in that first page under section 2B, what does that paragraph mean?
2B. State board means the state board of regents, state money.
And then pursuant to policies promulgated by the university and approved by the state board, which is the Board of Regents. Is that not correct?
Correct.
So, and that follows to everything after that applies, I assume?
Well, yeah, you have to keep reading after, and to the extent such policies involve the expenditure of state monies also approved by the state board.
Maybe I'm looking at a different version then. I
might
apologize.
be-
No, I may not have the latest. This was not from what happened this morning. This was the earlier draft. So you maybe something changed there. I had not seen that.
Well, and let me check at the bill.
Because the way I read it, it applied to everything that followed, meaning there needed to be policies approved by the board as to how any of these
Okay,
things
so-
are handled.
It reads state money
That you've got as well.
Yeah, it says
Maybe some
pursuant.
change there.
Yeah, pursuant to policies promulgated by the research university, and to the extent such policies involve the expenditure of state monies, also approved by the state board, each research university shall have the power to. So
John, if
power would only extend.
sorry. So following that, then like in 1 and 2 below that, if there were no state funds utilized, then the way this is drafted, the universities could do basically whatever without board oversight. So
That
for
is how I-
example, I know like there recently, the University of Utah sold their revenue rights to a private equity firm. This bill as drafted would allow that to occur without any KBOR oversight.
That can happen today.
Potentially, yes.
Can happen today.
Yeah, I think that can happen today. The exact example you gave could happen today for athletics.
If I can, and let me highlight that because that's a good question. So Allen Fieldhouse is a state property, state asset. Today, I think there would be some sort of an approval process before that could be licensed to the Peter Johnston Private Equity Group, so that it would be the Johnston Center at Allen Fieldhouse. As I read this legislation, it's a state asset, but that transaction would not involve state money. So that's a pretty significant wording to me. Because I think what I suspect surely would be desired by somebody writing this would be to include state assets and state money, not to exclude, because we all know that I mean, the Big Ten just went through a big rigmarole over whether to let private equity into their Big Ten conference revenue sharing, and arguably whether that's state assets or not state assets. But we all know that we have state assets of some significant value. I mean, in all respects. So that would be my concern, unless somebody can tell me that you think I'm reading that wrong. But I think when it refers to the expenditure of state money instead of, I mean, I think that addition is significant, and represents to me a baby being thrown out with bathwater.
Regent Crocker, were you asking a question about a building or actually the evaluation of the team itself?
Well, I guess my question was just more on related to, in the way this is anything, on knowing private equity is trying to get their mitts into college or universities, but yeah. So I was using Utah as an example because it's the only one I knew of that I didn't have the Big Ten, but so that would be separate from with, for example, the K-State athletics would be separate from the revenue share for that. And that, for your instance, in terms of what Utah did. But I guess to Regent Johnston's point, or for K-State, Bramlage, branding Bramlage Coliseum, I guess that's a bad example because that's not a state asset necessarily. Or the new business school, selling it to a PE firm. The way I believe we're interpreting this would not require any oversight from the Board of Regents.
It would depend on whether or not the policy that authorized that involved the expenditure of state funds.
Which,
and I'd suggest that trying to work that out in practice can be very, very difficult.
Yeah. More litigation.
Other Regent Johnston, do you have a comment, question?
Now known as the other region.
Well, I'm sorry. Quickly,
you're the first one in my book.
Wow, thanks, Jake.
He can't even call you
Regent Crocker just referred to Peter Johnston, so I'll let you Johnston.
So thank you so much for going through this, because I know it's a lot to make, just to sort of make sense of all this, as we definitely want to do, because we want to make sure that we understand, what kinds of obviously, parameters this includes, and what kind of consequences that it will have. When I look at section 7, and then if you look at F2, it says that state agency does not include any research university as defined in section 1. So does that mean that the research universities are no longer state agencies? And along with that, it also means that the regionals still have to stand up all the resources and comply with all of the policies that we have previously done for all 6. Would that be correct?
So section 7 would provide that laws addressing selection of architects, engineers, and land surveyors would not apply to the research universities. So the definitions here.
That's what my question is. So is the definition, it says state agency does not include any research university.
I think it's, as I read that, that's for the purpose of this
Okay.
provision of statute. So with respect to the statute that talks about selection of architects, engineers, and land surveyors, it says state agencies have to follow these things. And by saying that the research universities aren't state agencies for that purpose, they don't have to follow those processes.
So this definition only applies to that piece of it. That
Let me check that.
Because that's
Section 7 starts in the bill, KSA 75-1251 is hereby amended to read as follows. As used in this provision, 75-1250 through 75-1267, and amendments thereto, unless the context otherwise requires, the following terms shall be defined as follows. So they're saying for this part of the section on the selection of those three types of services, state agencies are required to, and the exemption here for research universities is done by saying for the purposes of those 17 or so statutes, they're not state agencies. So this selection process for those three things doesn't apply to them.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes, Regent Crocker.
I'm sorry, I was trying to write as fast as I could when you were going through that, and I don't think I got, but could you go back to section 24 on page 13 and explain what this is doing? Again, this is related to the 51% and the maintenance funds. I'm just trying to make sure I want to understand what this is doing.
So this is before I was with the Regents, but my understanding, okay, so section 24 provides, let me find it here.
If I read this right, it's clarifying that this will only apply to Pittsburgh State, Fort Hays, and Emporia. But what this is, I guess, is what I want to make sure I understand.
Yeah. So President Flanders probably has a better explanation than I do. My recollection is that at that time of that this bill came about, the legislature said for certain types of projects, universities have to fund the maintenance of those going forward. And the distinction that they made was the 51% state funding and then froze it at that level in 2007. So what it provides is improvement means a construction of a building or other capital improvement of which at least 51% of the cost is financed with private monies. State boards, the Board of Regents, each state educational institution shall provide for the future annual maintenance and operation cost for an improvement. From and after July 1st, 2007, the state board shall not request any monies from the state general fund to pay for the cost of maintenance and operations of improvements which exceed the amount of monies paid from the state general fund for fiscal year 2007 for such purpose.
So if I'm hearing you correctly then, but with the way this has changed, then those institutions that are listed here are still not able to go get money from the legislature, but we could do that for the research institutions.
Correct. The regional universities would still be
prohibited from using state funds for maintenance,
but the research universities would not.
Regent, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Chair Benson.
Well, hold on just a second, President.
Yeah, so I'd have a little background on that. I think Elaine could also help with that. It was a bit of a back in the day when it was with agreement with the Education Building Fund, and that we were going to keep building buildings and the maintenance was going to, and so we had a deal with the legislature that said, hey, if we build them after this date, we'll be responsible for the maintenance. Now, Elaine, and we used to have senators bring that up constantly, but
That is correct, Mr. Chairman. As Blake Flanders has characterized it, in 2007 was the large attempt by the legislature at the time to address the infrastructure needs of our institutions. We had then the Great Recession and it all was abandoned, basically. But those statutes from that time remain in place. And so this statute, Section 24, requires that if a building was funded a certain way, the university is responsible for maintaining it and financing it and taking care of it in perpetuity. So I hope that helps.
Thank you. Yes, Regent Alicia Johnston.
Thank you. So going back to section 14, I think we may have talked about that before, which basically the administration shall be responsible for the maintenance, repair, and upkeep of any of the buildings, charge, care, management, control, et cetera. And that would not have board oversight before. My question is, we do have an EBF fund, is that what it's called? So they would still receive the funding from the EBF, but they would not have to comply with section 14. I mean, so section 14 says that they would basically be it was amended as follows, which means that they wouldn't have to comply with maintenance and all the other things that are part of that EBF funding.
So I think that section 14.
My question.
as I understand it, thank you, Regent Johnston. That amendment, that statute that had been 75-3763, that's a Department of Administration statute. So it involves the maintenance, repair, upkeep of improvements of certain buildings by the Secretary of Administration. So that probably is not very applicable to the research universities or probably the regional universities, to provide that neither that section nor the contracts related to would apply to the research universities. I don't know that that really has a lot of impact on what this bill does overall. It's a mention, but I'm not sure that the exception there has really a lot of practical impact because the nature of the Secretary of Administration or the Department of Administration probably doesn't have a whole lot of upkeep of anything that any of the universities.
But the EBF fund would still be used to take care of the maintenance and the other issues on these campuses. Is that correct?
Yes.
Sorry.
That's my understanding.
It wouldn't change that.
I believe there's some language in the bill that makes reference possibly to, and I apologize, I can't pull that up right away, but I do think it's contemplated that the research universities would still receive EBF and possibly other funds.
Regent Wolfmore.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So this is sort of broader, but the bill's going to committee tomorrow. We're hearing to the Higher Education Committee. And as you know, in the legislature, you never know how it's going to work. I mean, the bill is presented in one way, but it can be amended even in the committee, or it can be amended on the floor. And so I realize that this bill has is a beginning, that there's a desire to have much more in this bill, but sort of running out of time this year. So probably next year, or maybe even on the floor or in the committee. So I guess I'm worried about some of the things that were in previous documents that gave broad exemptions on Cora, on procurement laws, exempting essentially from procurement laws. No one said those are dead. They just said not right now. Maybe you could go through a few of the top ones that were in previous versions.
Yeah, so I think that there's been discussions about things that were important to at least the research universities that could help them be more efficient, and then trying to identify what those things might be. And so there were suggestions in the area, Open Records Act, possible amendments, and other areas
Procurement, I
with, I'm sorry.
I think procurement was one of them.
Yeah, procurement's in this one too.
Yeah.
I mean, as well. So, and
broader.
that would, you know, the universities, both the regionals and the research universities have procurement staffs, and they have, they follow, KSA 70, I think it's 74, 769, 7569, that's addressed in here. So they have, largely a lot of existing, exemptions from the regular state process that other agencies might follow. There's some limitations on that, but, they have, in practice, procurement offices now that go out and do the bidding and procedures that they follow. So for those things, this would expand that a little bit because there's some exceptions to that for architectural services and engineering services and what's called ancillary technical services, ancillary to construction type projects. So they have those, and that is addressed in this bill and would likely be one of those things that could help with efficiencies. Some of the other areas I think that weren't included, I can't, I don't know that I can say much on.
One was compensation, that the compensation of the CEOs wouldn't be published. I believe that was one of them.
I don't know that it was compensation of the CEOs of, well, as I recall, maybe it was I thought maybe it was broader compensation of
Not just CEOs, but the.
yeah, like staff,
broader administration.
employees.
Yeah.
And to your point, that's how the conversation was initiated, looking at certain state policies and procedures that, especially if we ultimately have the authority and the oversight of the institutions, if there were parallel state processes and policies that were also in play, I think this conversation began with, instead of the redundancy, let's clean that up a little bit because there's still the accountability and the oversight from the board. To me, the big change is what you described about the qualifier just with state monies. And I worry, to me, that's a game changer because I worry that then takes the responsibility that we've been charged with in terms of control and oversight or control and responsibility. But that's how that conversation began.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Regent Crocker.
Chair Benson, I guess I kind of echoing your comments. I think when I read through this, that one line, the proviso that suggests that it's only state funds, you know, the rest of these things seem to be more procedural, whereas that is more oversight oriented. And if I wrote fast, so I may not have gotten this, but for example, you know, again, if we're dealing with state assets, and Section 9 removes the need for market valuation in a property sale, and we don't have oversight or policy that supports that. So this may be a better example. You could have, and again, comments, we have to think about this as it relates to going forward and new people sitting in these chairs. So please don't take any of these comments. You know, you could have a sale of a property at a below market value to a donor that we would have no oversight over.
Mm-hmm.
With the way I hear you tell me this is drafted. So I think those are some of the things, yeah, they're concerning.
Yeah, go ahead, Regent Prasker.
On section 1E, the university keeps their own inventory under policies. They, you know, basically, we will lose sight of assets of the buildings.
I'm not sure there's much of a difference there. So all state agencies, through some authority granted to the Director of Accounts and Reports for the state, for the Division of Department of Administration, Division of Accounts and Reports, are required to keep an inventory. The research universities under this bill would be exempted from that requirement, but then the bill turns around and places that same requirement on them. So it's just, instead of being subject to the accounts and reports requirement for state agencies, since they're this new entity this bill would still require that inventory to be
Gotcha.
created and maintained. So.
The naming of the building is not here, which, we keep wondering. We have already identified a donor and we almost have promised them this is going to go in, but that doesn't show up here. Like, will that be again our policy approval on that side? That's not changed. They come to us for approval,
There is
naming of the building.
nothing in this statute that addresses naming of buildings or the board's authority with respect to that. So I think I haven't had a lot of time to
Yes,
ponder
of
this, but
course.
I think
Thinking out
that
loud.
given that there's nothing here that explicitly would change that, I think that wouldn't be impacted.
Longer.
Chair, can I go back to the beginning or even before this? I mean, we've talked at fiscal affairs about doing some things, yeah, especially in the construction, renovation, maintenance of buildings, about gaining some efficiencies, yeah, from the process that has to go through, whether it's state statute or board policies. Yeah, but this seems to take that and put it on steroids.
Mhm.
Yeah, and take it completely out of our hands. Is that a fair assessment of this? Or, because, we all just got it and we're kind of trying to nitpick in the details. But
I just,
the big picture, is that a correct assessment of that?
Yes, if there's no state expenditure of funds involved, so you'd have no policy input around those things. Now, I would think that, the research universities are still going to have, I would think, some policies that are going to involve expenditure of state funds in that area, right? So how that exactly would look from what policies would come to you under this, I don't know yet. I haven't really been able to think through or talk through with others how all that might work. But yes, there'd be a lot of autonomy that would exist under this bill that doesn't exist now.
I mean, we've talked a lot about the state expenditures there. How much is there an ability for the universities to manipulate what expenses are state and what are from all the other sources that in the end of the day, we will have no authority over anything?
Yep.
Because you can come up with things that all the state money is spent for, unless it's directly earmarked from the legislature, that it's spent for this and it has nothing to do with any of our policies or procedures.
Yeah, I do think that's a legitimate concern. There could be a risk that there would be a ability to impact that on from the university side that the board wouldn't be able to do anything about.
so on that same line, I'm also worried about like investment going in a building, which is great. But if we are not able to catch up with the maintenance and everything, the state may have to bail out some assets that way in future. And so we are not taking the decision to put it in, how does the ROI plan out with the current markets? If something is not in the right investment, then the remaining money will have to come out from the taxpayers' pockets, and the state may have to bail out that information. So there is that concern as well.
I believe Regent Johnston had a question.
Yes, and it's not really a question, but I just wanted to voice my concerns about this. The Board of Regents has been tasked with the stewardship, not just of state funds and state assets as they go to state universities, but also the fact that we are responsible to make sure that our state has accessible, affordable, high quality education that feeds, of course, the economic engine of this state, as well as the cultural engine of the state. And as our mission states, to help, of course, the families of the state. And I just want to make sure that we're not accidentally, and I think the other Regent Johnston said this, that we are not.
Now you're the other reason.
I had to get that in.
That you or him?
That we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because with public monies, and we have to have public trust. And, you know, that's obviously what our republic is built on, is that those citizens, if they are contributing, that they obviously then get to have some oversight. I fully understand that oversight costs money in terms of resources. And so that's another one of my concerns, is that now if we're going to split the R1s from the other three, the regionals, which are incredibly critical, not only to their region, but also to the state, what we're doing is we're forcing them to come up with the resources to also make sure that they abide by all these requirements, but the R1s do not have to, which again is going to separate us as far as a system and give an advantage, in my opinion, to the R1s when we're looking, you know, at recruiting and all those other types of things. So I think that those are real questions that we really need to take a look at. And to Regent Dykas's point, I do think that there's legitimate things that we can take a look at that will help us move forward in a more nimble way, but also meet our stewardship responsibilities in making sure, like I said, that we are affording all Kansans an accessible, affordable, high-quality education, which we have been doing for the last 100 years. And the Pillar 3 reports that were just given show what a fantastic job the R1s have been doing under the current, you know, governance and statutes. And so I think that just, if you take a look at that, you know, that sort of speaks volumes to me in terms of what we have been able to do with the public trust, knowing that we still have, you know, we still have some oversight over this situation. And so I guess those are my concerns. And I think they really need to be vetted out, and it's something that we can't just stand up and be like, okay, we're moving to this other, you know, sort of this other procedure. And I think there's going to be a whole lot of unintended consequences that really concern me.
And to the point made by Regent Dykus and Regent Crocker, there's a lot of good in here that as far as areas that we could streamline the process. And the only change I was going to advocate for here today was to expand it to the regionals, you know, so that it included them as well. But there are some of these things that you referenced there as far as professional services and things like that we would most likely support, you know, an exemption on those. But it's that big change that is a game changer for me. President Flanders. Okay. Yes, Regent Crocker.
Yeah, I appreciate, and obviously the Fiscal Affairs Committee's had several conversations about trying to improve things. I just also want to remind us as an organization that once the legislation burden is out of the way, we need to look at our policies and make sure that we're doing our best that we can to make things effective and efficient for the universities too. So, but obviously we have to comply with state law. So once, you know, if that changes, you know, as I look at this, and I appreciate there are a lot of things I'm, again, trying to understand quickly as I write quickly. I think my biggest issue with what's been presented in front of us today is line 20 on the first page, and the limiting any authority of the board to when state funds are actually being expended. And so I would have a tough time supporting this as drafted.
Yes, Regent Wolfmore.
Yeah, just to kind of build on what this Regent Johnson said, I won't say other. You know, I too we probably have some antiquated policies that need to be changed. Completely agree, but there's a way to do this in conjunction with the board. And additionally, you know, this was sort of initially sold to us as being somewhat like the Hospital Authority Act, for the University of Kansas health system. That's really not an accurate comparison because the University of Kansas Authority gets no state appropriations. The way I understand this, that the regionals would continue to get their same appropriations. So I think we owe more to the taxpayers and to the families who send their kids to the various universities, and we owe more accountability because with public funds, you have to also have public trust. You know, in a private business, you can shake, it can be done with a handshake, but this is not the same. These are public funds and there has to be accountability over all aspects of it. Thank you.
Other comments, other questions? Okay, hearing none, I feel like we need a recommendation one way or the other on whether to support the bill as it is currently written. So I think we have pointed out that there are good parts of this bill that would probably gain board support, but there are others that would not. So yeah, Regent
If I
Johnson.
may, Mr. Chairman, I think my recommendation or motion, if that's the appropriate format, would be in follow-up to Regent Crocker's comment, which is that in the form presented, my recommendation would be that we not support this. In particular, I'm looking at that section 1, subsection B. It's line 19 through 23, and it's that provision that says, and to the extent such policies of state money. That's too steep a hill for me to climb. So from my vantage point, my recommendation or my motion would be that we not support the legislation as it is presented.
Okay, I have a motion by Regent Johnston.
I can second.
Okay, second by Regent Parasker. Any further questions, any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. All right. Seeing no other business on the agenda, we will stand adjourned.